more recently it's sort of acquiring greater traction and directivity. Many of my colleagues from the SPS are here. We have Tarun Basu, all of you know him, he is the president of the society. And again we say rather affectionately that Tarun's visibility and his dynamism are inversely proportional, but he's been pushing the SPS to sort of look at policy related issues. And this is the fourth in the year where we have picked up specific themes, and the idea really is to get a group of people who are informed and who can contribute to an objective understanding of fairly complex issues. Earlier in the year we had a focus on the Maghreb for obvious reasons given the regional dynamic in that part of the world, and it's in that spirit that we brought all of you here this morning. And as I said, in the course of the day we will have both the structured presentations and the more informal Q&A session, which hopefully will shed light on what is really a very, very significant subject for all of us. And we have broadly sort of entitled this as the consolidation of democracy in Bangladesh. Now, for those of you who are familiar with the Indian discourse on the subject, while it appears that there is what you might call as a greater preoccupation in the regional context with Pakistan, many of the, I would say, more perceptive observers in India, both in government, outside, and those who contribute to such deliberations, have long agreed that India's most critical and important neighbor is Bangladesh for a variety of reasons. And over the years, Bangladesh has had its own domestic trajectory that we are all aware of. And the developments of the last few months leading up to the election in January, I think, in a way, provide the framework about both the domestic challenges for Bangladesh as also the implications for the region. So it's in that spirit we thought that we would invite our colleagues, friends from Bangladesh to share their thoughts. Around this table you have a lot of people who have hands-on experience of Bangladesh amongst our Indian participants, particularly those from the diplomatic corps who have served there. We have some eminent academics and analysts. Again, most of you know them. They have been working on Bangladesh for a fairly long time. Personally, I was just telling Imtiaz that I'm like Rip Van Winkle, because on track 2, my first association with Bangladesh was with the then BISS. I mean, it's still there, BISS, but this was in the first tenure of the Awami League, and we had a very robust interaction. And I recall distinctly when I was in the IDSA that we had visited the staff college in Dhaka more than once. We had very good interactions, and we invited both the NDC and the staff college here, and we've had meetings in this very institution in the India International Center. But again, all of you are aware of the developments over the last 2 decades that have led to a certain disruption, I think, in that level of interaction. So I'm delighted that we are able to pick up the threads, as it were, and to really provide a very, very insightful and again informed overview about what is the current play, if you will. We have Ambassador Pinak Chakravarti. Again, I think most of you know him. He retired most recently from the Foreign Office here in Delhi as the Secretary, and earlier he was our High Commissioner in Bangladesh between various other appointments, and he's had more than one tenure in Dhaka. I recall when Pinak was there in his many avatars, I had occasion to visit Dhaka at that time as part of a track 2 team, and we had some very useful interactions, and his own, I would say, understanding of both Bangladesh as a country and the region is very distinctive. So on that note, what I will do is to request Ambassador Pinak Chakravarti to make his opening remarks, set the ball rolling, and he's also very kindly agreed to take a few questions. So we are slightly sort of conscious of our timelines because we have some very eminent speakers and participants. So you'll forgive me if I occasionally nudge you, but it's a very empathetic nudge. So on that note, I'll request Pinak. Please, sir.
I'm delighted to be here at this roundtable discussion on Bangladesh. Thank you for inviting me. It's good to see old friends from Bangladesh in the panel, and I welcome them back to India again. I know that our Bangladeshi friends bring with them the latest news from their country, and I am as eager as all others to hear their views on the evolving situation in Bangladesh. And as you said, Uday, indeed BD is India's, or BD as we say it in our lingo, Bangladesh is India's most important neighbor in South Asia. In an op-ed column on Bangladesh 2 weeks back, I wrote that a storm is brewing in the east. It would not be inaccurate to repeat here that this political storm continues to brew without showing any signs of abating. The War Crimes Tribunal, derided by its opponents as politically motivated and legally deficient, has sentenced more people to death in absentia. Supporters of the War Crimes Tribunal are also dissatisfied on account of verdicts that they feel have not been commensurate with the crimes. Supporters are aggrieved that the tribunal has come too late after 31 years since the bloody Liberation War. Another 60-hour hartal has started and I believe ended yesterday. Begum Khaleda Zia has rebuffed approaches by Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina for talks and postponement of the hartal. Any hartal in Bangladesh brings the country to a standstill and causes considerable economic damage. The daily wage earners, mainly women workers in the ready-made garment sector, contributing 80% of Bangladesh's exports, suffer the most in hartals. Unfortunately, hartals have become the primary tool of political mobilization and opposition. The two major political parties, the Awami League and the BNP, must both shoulder the blame for this in varying degrees. The recent telephone conversation between the two battling Begums, as they are sometimes called, is quite remarkable and makes explicit the entrenched and uncompromising position of each leader. The current political situation is not helpful for nurturing and sustaining democracy in Bangladesh in the long term. Ever since the election of 1991, Bangladesh has had regular elections, and these have been generally peaceful, and there have been changes of government. It remains among the few democracies in the Islamic world. The deep mistrust and polarized polity has ensured that there is a complete lack of trust between the two major political parties and their allies. And I think they are themselves to blame for not fostering faith and independence in institutions like the judiciary, bureaucracy, and the Election Commission. If these institutions were impartial and strong, Bangladesh would not have needed the caretaker administration system to conduct elections. A constitutional amendment has removed this provision, and the current dispute is centered on how to craft an administration under whose aegis the next elections will be conducted. Options are limited on this account. Sheikh Hasina has offered an all-party government headed by her. Khaleda Zia has adamantly opposed any government headed by Sheikh Hasina. She has proposed other options which may not be constitutionally feasible unless the constitution is amended yet again. The shadow of the army looms in the background, though it must be said that the Bangladesh army has turned increasingly professional and may not have much appetite for intervention in politics as compared to the past. It is astonishing to note that there have been open calls by opposition parties inviting the army to take over, a move that severely undermines democracy. It seems these parties prefer the army to take over rather than follow constitutional provisions. Such is the prevailing political mess in Bangladesh. While the political scene is marked by uncertainty and violence, Bangladesh's economy has surprisingly grown at a steady clip. Clocking over 6% GDP growth, exports have grown both to India and globally. India-Bangladesh trade has cost USD 5 billion, making Bangladesh India's largest trading partner in SAARC. The RMG sector, that is the ready-made garment sector, despite multifarious problems, has increased its output, and exports have, I think, touched around $24 billion. Remittances are flowing in steadily from around 7 million plus migrant workers abroad, including a large number in India. Upwards of $15 billion is added to Bangladesh's foreign exchange reserves annually via the remittance route. Social indicators have also performed creditably. There has been an impressive reduction in poverty, and Millennium Development Goals are on the verge of being achieved by the target year of 2015. Thus, Bangladesh continues to surprise everyone by these contradictions. Uncertainty over sustaining democratic politics versus robust economic performance. The political downside has other aspects like corruption, law and order, and price rise. Several scams have tainted the ruling party's reputation, though the previous BNP Jamaat government was no stranger to corruption, lawlessness, nepotism, and price rise. The toxic legacy of the previous BNP Jamaat government includes nurturing terrorism, communalism, and collaboration with Indian insurgent groups. While anti-incumbency has been the prevailing trend in all elections in Bangladesh, Bangladeshis voters today do not have a clear-cut choice, but some would say they do. But faced as they are with this dichotomy between Bangladesh's politics and the economy. The role played by major foreign powers has always acquired a larger-than-life profile in Bangladesh in times of political turmoil. There are indications of American, Saudi Arabian, and Pakistani convergence that is inimical to the Awami League and leans towards the BNP and the Jamaat-e-Islami. While this may not be a result of a conscious policy or consultation among these countries, it appears that they are backing the same horse. There is considerable baggage of history for this convergence. The Jamaat is the main Islamist party in Bangladesh, though now banned and its registration as a political party cancelled after a court verdict that has held that the Jamaat's charter is unconstitutional. The party has widespread social and economic influence in a majority Muslim country, though it has never succeeded in translating this influence into electoral capital. The Jamaat's usefulness stems from its ability to attach itself as an ally to the BNP and ride piggyback to power. The Jamaat has intimate relations with its namesake in Pakistan, having been an integral part of the original organization. It has therefore always been close to Pakistan and Saudi Arabia, receiving considerable funding from these two countries and other Islamic institutions in the oil-rich countries. It has built up an impressive economic base in Bangladesh. It is, however, cornered with its leadership arraigned and convicted for war crimes. The Americans have had a testy relationship with the Awami League. Historical baggage apart, personality-driven power policy has also influenced American attitudes. The finest example is the spat between Professor Muhammad Yunus, a close friend of the Clintons, and the Awami League government. The corruption scandal involving funding of the Padma Bridge project by the World Bank has also vitiated relations. But above all, the belief that the Jamaat is a moderate Islamic party and if hounded beyond a point will be driven underground with consequences that could be worse than keeping them visible as a mainstream political party has influenced American policy. This argument is flawed for many reasons and helps the Jamaat develop leverage with its Western interlocutors. After 9/11, the disastrous war in Iraq, and the military campaign to oust the Taliban government in Afghanistan, Americans have ventured forth in search of moderate Islamic entities to cultivate them with the objective of showing that they are not anti-Islamic. The Jamaat in Bangladesh and Pakistan has received considerable attention from American diplomats. This has not persuaded the Jamaat to eschew violence as an option, even during the best of times, and induced not an iota of change in their obscurantist social and political objectives which undermine all efforts in building a secular polity. Their views against the Ahmadiyyas, Sufis, statues and sculptures, women's role in society and minorities are well documented. The Americans also seem comfortable with the BNP, seeing them as more market-friendly and pro-business, and the Awami League as cozying up to Russia and China. American policy has to be understood in the context of history and its foreign policy's intrinsic belief in balance of power principles. It is instructive to read the recent book by the American author Gary J. Bass, The Blood Telegram, India's Secret War in East Pakistan. The baggage of history becomes clear. India's traditional closeness to the Awami League is no secret. This closeness notwithstanding, India's domestic politics have created impediments for implementing two important agreements, the Teesta Water Sharing Agreement and the Boundary Agreement. The good news is that progress on the latter seems bright, and the constitutional amendment bill will be introduced in the next session of Parliament. Bilateral relations during the last BNP Jamaat government nosedived for a variety of reasons, principally on the issues of terrorism, support and succor to Indian insurgent groups, and the rising jihadist activities with the active collaboration of Pakistan. India has nevertheless reached out to Khaleda Zia to build bridges. Any repeat of the policies of the past by a BNP-led government which challenge Indian diplomacy again and could lead to adverse impact on bilateral relations. It is inevitable in Bangladeshi politics for the BNP to point fingers at India for conspiring to bring the Awami League back to power, and the same accusations are likely to surface again. The other major powers, Russia, China, and Japan, have taken a more nuanced stance and counseled compromise. But in the deeply polarized polity of Bangladesh, that is easier said than done. Why is the political landscape of Bangladesh so polarized? Apart from the diverging legacies of Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman and General Ziaur Rahman, the politics of assassination, military intervention, and the bitter and the bloody memories of the Liberation War, there is also the unholy nexus between politicians, business persons, and bureaucrats. Political power brings with it the authority to seek rent in many ways, and that is why it is so bitterly contested with a winner-takes-all attitude. It is a moot point whether political leaders in Bangladesh or elsewhere, whether in power or opposition, really care about the welfare of the people at large. Massachusetts Institute of Technology economist Daron Acemoglu and Harvard University political scientist James Robinson, in their new book, Why Nations Fail, The Origins of Power, Prosperity and Poverty, claim that, and I quote, those who have power make choices that create poverty. They get it wrong not by mistake or ignorance, but on purpose, unquote. Acemoglu and Robinson assert that the single most important reason for unrest in many developing countries is the willful promotion, or at best tolerance of inequality by a ruling minority economic elite in these countries. This may be true of even developed countries. They argue further that the key to general prosperity is political. A nation's success almost exclusively depends on its economic and political institutions. While this thesis can be contested, it cannot be denied that institutions are important for growth. The authors argue that geography, such as natural resources, location, climate, culture, and visionary leaders are necessary. But growth is primarily about a country's institutions, and that institutions are what they are because political actors in any given society have an interest in keeping them that way. They argue that bad institutions are the product of political systems that create private gains for elites in developing countries, even if by doing so they impoverish the broader society. As noted earlier, Bangladesh's economic potential is considerable. Its economic resilience is impressive, and Bangladesh will do much better if political stability and governance improves. Perhaps this thesis explains why some countries in Asia and Africa remained poor, while countries such as South Korea, which had once been poor, has successfully increased incomes. Or the fact that an average European is 7 times as prosperous as the average Mexican, or 20 times as prosperous as the average inhabitant of sub-Saharan Africa. There are other worrying aspects apart from the ongoing political tussle. These issues are all related to the nature of politics in Bangladesh. Press freedom has been under attack. The minority Hindu community is already showing signs of nervousness, recalling no doubt the onslaught they had to face when the BNP Jamaat government came to power in 2001. The Hindu minority in Bangladesh generally votes with its feet when under duress and migrates to India. Illegal migration has already caused severe democratic fissures in many bordering states of India, and a further bout of migration will add to bilateral problems. As Bangladesh grapples with political confrontation, all kinds of allegation and conspiracy theories will surface. There is a danger of an election boycott by the opposition parties. If that happens, Bangladesh is in for a period of political instability that does not bode well for our region. I'm sure this roundtable will focus on these and other issues. Discussions today will no doubt help in understanding the domestic situation in Bangladesh and the region much better, and also perhaps provide some prescriptions. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Pinak, I think, for outlining the scope of the subject that we plan to discuss today. I'm very glad that you drew attention to this book, The Blood Telegram. Those of you who have not already seen it, I would urge you most earnestly to have a look, because it provides, I think, a very, very valuable context about what we are discussing today. And I think it was Mark Twain who very famously once observed that history may not repeat itself, but it sure rhymes. And in that sense, if you recall what happened to East Pakistan pre-71 and where we are now in 2013, this is not the first time that democracy has been sacrificed because of the compulsion of realpolitik or larger drivers as far as the international community and the regional grid is concerned. But Ambassador Chakravarti has very kindly offered to take a few questions. This is a slight departure from the standard procedure for an inaugural and opening address. But if any of you would like to sort of make a quick intervention, I'd be happy to, and then we'll move into the first session for the roundtable. Please introduce yourself so that,
I'm Alok Bansal from Center for Land Warfare Studies. So my question to you, Ambassador Chakravarti, is that you talked of Jamaat's close links with Jamaat in Pakistan. Why not with Jamaat in India? Because when the Jamaat activists were sentenced, there were demonstrations in Kolkata. Why are we trying to sweep it under the carpet?
You are right about the demonstrations, but I'm not sure whether that was the Jamaat-e-Islami Hind. That was some local Islamic organizations. And I don't think the kind of contacts the Jamaat has with the Pakistani counterpart has any comparison with their contacts with the Indian Jamaat-e-Islami Hind. And I think the contacts are minimal with the Indian Jamaat-e-Islami. I think you should go and talk to Maulana Asad Madani and you will find out what the contacts are like. And as I continue to assert that the contacts with the Jamaat in Pakistan are much deeper. Where do Jamaatis go when they flee from Bangladesh? They go to Pakistan. Why do they go there? Because they have a safe haven and a refuge there. They don't come to India.
So you mentioned minorities as the Hindus, but there is a large number of Buddhists also in Bangladesh. So they are also under this fear of attack.
You're absolutely right. In fact, the Chittagong Hill Tracts, which probably has the largest other concentration of minorities, the Chakmas, there are about 18 or 19 tribes. And they have been under pressure for a very long time, particularly with migration and land rights, etc. And with the Rohingya sort of upsurge coming up, there's a lethal mix there. And there are reports of, LET and others ganging up. And I'm told that in the hill tracts, which is fairly remote, not many roads and jungles, there are training camps being established by the LET, Jamaat and others, all these kind of organizations to train the Rohingyas to take on the Myanmaris, in Myanmar. So, and the Chakmas who fought a long running insurgency with the Bangladeshis till there was that peace treaty, and unfortunately no government has ever delivered on that peace treaty in Bangladesh. And if they had, then perhaps this problem could have been solved earlier.
Okay, I'll take, yes, sir.
Justin Davis, U.S. Embassy. Thank you, Ambassador, for your commentary about just sort of setting the stage. But I wanted to ask just one question. I think it was in Ronnie Bachi in a recent op-ed article that sort of made some commentary about this connection that the United States has being more comfortable with the BNP government or the BNP party. Maybe expound a bit about that and maybe why you believe such a thing exists.
Well, I've certainly hinted at it in my remarks, and one of the reasons is that the Americans, when Secretary Clinton was there, there was a big dust-up, I think, with Professor Yunus, because Professor Yunus is a personal friend of the Clintons, and I think remarks were made, etc., that Sheikh Hasina didn't like very much, and whatever they are doing to the Grameen Bank, for example, has created a lot of a bit of a confrontation between the U.S. and Sheikh Hasina. But above all, I think Sheikh Hasina seems to believe that, I don't know, this is probably her personal kind of thing, that the 1975 coup and the killing of her father and her family, that the Americans and the Pakistanis had a hand in it. She seems to believe that, and she doesn't forget it. She's not a person who forgets very quickly, and so that is another factor. These are personal issues, but they do matter. Then, of course, there are these constant, hectoring by American diplomats and others about various things in Bangladesh, human rights and corruption and stuff like that. And that has created a bit of and I think ultimately, I mean, this is, you probably as an American diplomat would know better than I, that the BNP and Jamaat have been closer to the American establishment than the Awami League for these reasons. And apart from the fact that BNP does and probably has an image of being more market and business friendly. The Jamaat, as I have mentioned, tries to project itself as a moderate Islamic group. So these are all, these appeals to the Americans, I think, policymakers.
Okay, I'll take the last comment question from Rashmi Saxena. She's a member of the Society for Policy Studies and a very senior journalist. And for the record, she covered the 1971 war. Hindustan Times, right? Perhaps the only media person here who covered that war since George Varghese and Samir Pala not here.
Thank you. My question, Ambassador, is, you mentioned that India is trying to reach out to Khalida. We all know what the relationship has been. What do you think are the chances of any success? Do you think there will be some sort of forward movement?
Let me take you back to July 1999 when Atal Bihari Vajpayee came to Bangladesh on his visit as Prime Minister of India. And both Sheikh Hasina and Prime Minister Vajpayee started the first bus service, if you remember. And I was, of course, there, and I know personally what happened, etc., because I was the chief coordinator of the visit. And we made all kinds of attempts to get Begum Khalida Zia to meet Prime Minister Vajpayee. And we were kept hanging, and finally she did not meet. The same thing she did to our president when he went on a state visit. Despite all these insults and discourtesies, we have reached out to her. We called her here, we gave her the red carpet welcome, etc., because we don't think that it is in our policy, it makes sense to be partisan. And but even after that visit, she went back, and when our president went, she refused to meet, refused or made some very dodgy kind of reasons that, today is Hartal, so I can't come, and some kind of very silly reasons, really. Now, these things are not forgotten by the Indian public or policy makers. And again, there's a bit of a personality thing in this. But my sense is that there is no way you can change Khalida Zia. She is committed to whatever she believes for whatever reasons. This is not a place to go into that. There's a long history. And she also believes that her route to power is by aligning with the fundamentalist parties, because on her own she can never get the majority. And as I mentioned in my paper, that it suits both the Jamaat and the fundamentalist parties and the BNP to act together and join in the political sort of struggle or whatever, or electoral, politics.
Arun, last question.
Pinak, in your remarks, you talked about the convergence of views and outlook of the Saudis, the Americans, and the Pakistanis, and the fact that they're backing the same horse. And this is not the horse that India is backing. Now, do you see a possibility, or, in the sense that we are looking at a period of political instability in Bangladesh, that Bangladesh turning out to be a staging ground from some regional power rivalry in the future over the political equations and the evolving political dynamics in Bangladesh? And some kind of, are we looking at another Afghanistan there, or what? Or is this too far-fetched?
Well, there was a time during the BNP Jamaat government that there was banners and slogans. I don't know whether you ever saw that Far Eastern Economic Review, which said that Amra hobo Taliban, or some such thing like that. Bangla hobe Taliban. Because there was that jihadist upsurge at that time which wanted to convert Bangladesh into another Afghanistan. Fortunately, it did not happen. There was a crackdown and things changed. But I don't see it becoming a major major playing ground for too many, pulls and pressures from different groups. And Pakistan, of course, has had a long association with the BNP, and that's another story which you can get into it. ISI's collaboration with the BNP, and it's very much there. We have all the information, and including, gun running, that famous case of the 10 trucks that were caught for some very silly reasons. It was caught, otherwise it would have gone through. And the Saudis basically write checks, and when I served in Saudi Arabia, we had this famous phrase called checkbook diplomacy. So they give money to anybody, Islamic causes, etc., building mosques and charity. But ultimately, where that money goes is something one has to track. The Pakistanis are committed to BNP and Jamaat. The Chinese and the Japanese and Russians are a little more nuanced and have taken a more nuanced policies. But Awami League probably has better relations with the Chinese, Japanese, and the Russians than with the other three countries.
Thank you. I'm sorry if I'm unable to recognize some of you who have actually wanted to make an intervention. You'll permit me, we'll move into the next session. And what I will do is to request our participants who are sitting there, please come up, and frankly, you can leave at any point. Don't feel that you can make an exit. If you sit there, you can make an exit from here also. So I'd encourage you to come up. It just makes the participation, Ambassador Sethi, etc. Please come up if you would like to. And we'll quickly move into the next session. And as I said, our challenge today seems to be time management. You can see the kind of interest that the discussion has already generated. What I will do is to request our main speakers. Not at all. You did. I would sort of encourage the question answer. I will request our paper presenters, who are going to make their remarks, to try and stick to between 15 to 20 minutes if possible. The only reason being that I want to encourage as much time as possible for the discussion. And the weather being what it is, we're going to make a slight departure and also see whether we can get another round of tea and coffee. But that, as I said, we'll try and do. So what I will do is I will not introduce our principal speakers. They're all well known. Their CVs have been circulated. We have Professor Imtiaz Ahmed, Ambassador Veena Sikri, and Professor Sri Radha Datta in that order. My request again very earnestly is try not to read your papers, make your principal points, put your head on the block if you will, and you will have some very spirited intervention and discussions about what you say. Imtiaz, you're a black belt. I don't have to say anything about you. So,
thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Well, I think Pinak forgot to say that the Bengalis are hyper-democratic. And we have 4 Bengalis from Bangladesh, and I have 2 sitting besides, 6, and then there's Tarun and few more. Believe it or not, I don't say there's X number of, so if there are 10 Bengalis here, I'm sure you're going to get 20 views. And so, as a hyper-democrat Bengali, let me continue some of the things that Pinak said. I think I probably, would be similar on some of the issues. Yes, there is a contradiction. Economy is doing excellent, despite the global, downslide. We are having a 6% growth. Our Taka is doing actually better than India's. Our Millennium Development Goal is better than India. So the question is, why the political mess? Now, South Asians have never been politically rich, actually. If you look the entire civilizational history, the indigenous rulers were only 170 to 180 years. We were always ruled from outsiders, actually. So politically, we have never been, aggressive. But culturally, we have, Bengalis particularly, superbly cultural, the richness lies in our culture. Only now the economic element has entered, and as I say, 6% growth is not something that can take us to middle-income country, but I believe Bangladesh is in the right direction. What we need is some stability, particularly in the political context. We have other problems as well. We have environmental insecurity. We do have problems with energy deficit, but polarized politics seems to be, at least now that we are, when we're talking, one of the worrying factors. Now, why this tension between AL and BNP? Well, it got intensified in the wake of the government decision in 2011 to discontinue the caretaker administration, which Pinak has pointed out. And it was quite ironic because Awami League, after all, was the pioneer of this particular idea, then arguing that Bangladesh's democracy is different. Thrive through understand dealings with politicians and government officials. Business houses are able to flout all rules and regulations, from getting licenses, acquiring land, and building infrastructures to ignoring safety measures. In fact, following a recent building collapse near Dhaka, which you must have seen, over 1,100 workers died, one agency, an international agency, pointed out, and I quote, "You can't trust many buildings in Bangladesh. It's so corrupt that you can buy off anybody, and there won't be any retribution." So that will tell you that there's a business interest in politics. The bureaucracy also comes in very readily, because if you are not with the ruling party, then you end up becoming an OSD, not officer on special duty, but officer on sleeping duty, because the OSDs are thrown out. In fact, they literally don't have room. In fact, that was the pathetic part of it. They don't have a room, they have nothing to do, just roam around in the corridors. And I can give you a figure, in fact, in both sides. I'm not trying to say AL is doing it. When BNP came to power, they had some 300 made OSDs who were AL sympathizers. Now the AL has come, AL has done the same thing, in fact. Because if you are not with me, you are against me. The Bush doctrine is very much applied in the Bangladesh context. An article actually came out which says, of the party, by the party, for the party. That will tell you the scenario. Now, so partisan has been this relationship that any change in the regime is a total loss for those who have profited from this double nexus, whether politician, bureaucrat, or businessman. And hence the compulsion to remain in power by all possible means, from constitutional amendment to governmentalizing the war crime trials to making alliances with non-democratic forces. Now this requires further elaboration. Look at the this constitutional amendment. Now, the government decided to abolish the caretaker system by bringing an amendment to the Constitution called 15th Amendment, following a court judgment on 10th May 2011 that declared the caretaker system void and ultra vires to the Constitution. But In the same judgment, the court explicitly stated, and I quote from the verdict, the election to the 10th and the 11th Parliament may be held under the provisions of the above-mentioned 13th Amendment on the age-old principles, namely, quod alias non est licitam necessitas licitam facit, that which otherwise is not lawful, necessity makes lawful. Salus populi suprema lex, safety of the people is the supreme law, and salus republica est suprema lex, safety is the supreme law, quote, unquote. But contrary to the judgment, the government hurriedly brought the 15th Amendment and had it approved in the Parliament on 30th June 2011 with a majority of 291 to 1. The opposition boycotted that session. Ironically, it was the BNP which had objected to the caretaker system when it was in power, while the AL campaigned for it when it was in the opposition. Now, the reverse is the situation. So the question that merits attention, why the need for a neutral caretaker administration? Well, Pinnock has answered, I think. During our election, one is the political bureaucratic nexus, but also during the election, the government officials play a critical role. They become returning officers, they are housed at the election commission. So definitely the opposition, whoever the opposition is, whether it is the AL or BNP, always finds it problematic because all the postings and the promotions are done because of partisan reason, not because of efficiency, not because of series of examinations or etc. or anything. And that's the fear that the opposition has, and the reason why they always campaign for a caretaker system. The BNP did the same thing actually. They also brought an amendment called 14th Amendment on 16th May 2004, which increased the retirement of the Supreme Court judges from 65 to 67 years with the objective of having a favorable person as the head of the caretaker regime. AL just went one step farther and abolished the very system it had campaigned for and gave birth to when it became the ruling party. Now, the second one is the war crime trials on the Shahbag, and this is a very complex one. Because questions, and Pinnock also pointed out, questions were raised whether the AL was using the 71 war crime trial for partisan interest. There are good reasons for such questions. Firstly, the government established a relatively weak prosecution team, indeed with no prominent lawyers, some even lacking experience, which frustrated even those who were campaigning for such a trial for many years, including myself. Why would the government do such a thing on such a sensitive issue, knowing well that those charged with war crime are not only resourceful, but also are well connected nationally as well as internationally, unless the government has ulterior motives? So I always ask the government, I've been asking, the ministers and all, how come in the last 4 years, not a single international conference on genocide, Why didn't you bring the entire genocide people who have been working to Dhaka and tell them what is going on? If you don't address, definitely Jamaat and others would go and change their mind, and they're also resourceful. So, no response from that point of view. Moreover, the election it's a national tribunal. This is an important part. The government made it mandatory to appoint only national lawyers duly registered at the national courts for the tribunal, both for prosecution and defense. The tribunal is otherwise a domestic tribunal run without international oversight, although the government insists that the process is at par with international standards. Making the tribunal national, however, came to be questioned not only by those charged with war crime and now stand in trial, but also by the international community, particularly the United States and the European Union. In this respect, it remains different from the Nuremberg, Tokyo, Rwandan, or Campuchian genocide trials. Thirdly, charges of war crime were brought mainly against the members of Jamaat Islam. But 6 months back, actually, 6 to 8 months back, during the agitation of Jamaat, the police either got beaten up by the agitators, 5 minutes will be fine, or they were also receiving flowers, in fact. So people got confused, in fact, how come police is now receiving flower? Is there some tacit alliance going on? And it was actually the tacit alliance kind of a suggestion. When the second verdict came, the bloggers thought there must be something wrong. Because the first verdict, which was in absentia, he got capital punishment, but the second verdict, Mullah got life imprisonment. But the same kind of evidence was used. They said, in the British system, with the same kind of evidence, you get the same kind of punishment. So the bloggers got scared, or the bloggers came out, but then the ruling party tried to co-opt, and that became another kind of story. Pinak is right on saying that Jamaat really is not an electoral force as such, and I'll give you some figures very quickly. Jamaat has never been significant as an electoral force. In 2008 national elections, the Jamaat got 2 seats and only 4.55% of the vote, while in 2001, the Jamaat had bagged 18 seats, but 4.62% of the vote. It's only because of the alliance, in fact. Okay? In 1996, however, and 1996 was important because a lot of people said there was a tacit alliance with AL. In 1996, Jamaat received 8.61% of the votes. So that's the vote. So it's not, big thing, but both the parties try to make either explicit alliance or a tacit alliance. Now, why this time BNP is not letting Jamaat go? Well, this is important. Jamaat has never boycotted any election after it returned to politics after 75. And that's the fear BNP has, that if it allows Jamaat to go, then Jamaat probably will go for election, where BNP will be boycotting, and then the international community will say, if Jamaat can go into election, why can't you go to election? That's the kind of the fear that they have. Very quickly, I don't want to go into the other problem. Maybe during discussion I can talk about the Hifazat-e-Islam. That also, I think, was a blunder, because in the beginning, the government was not careful enough. They gave them permission to come and to have meetings in places where even BNP was not given. So people started thinking why that is so. One theory is that, well, maybe the ruling party wanted another outfit to counter Jamaat, because there is a leadership issue here. The Hifazat Islami, they don't agree with Maududi. But it's only the Maududi case, in fact. The rest are same. If you look at the 13-point demand Jamaat's kind of agenda, it's similar. Both are Wahhabis, in fact, in terms of, in the discourse of if you're familiar with the Salafi Wahhabi discourse, it's anti-Sufi, anti-Shrine, anti-Ahmadiyya. They're all the same kinds. Now, I want to end by saying, still I think there will be a soft landing. Now, why that is so? Well, Bangladesh politics had 2 experiences. One in 1996, where BNP went alone and had the election. It could not go very far. They had to come to it. Because today or tomorrow or day after tomorrow, you have to have the 2 parties come an election. You can't throw 30% to the Bay of Bengal. It's not possible. Let's face it. It's 160 million. It's not 5 million. It's 160 million, even it's 30%. Forget, now people will say it's more than 50, but take 30%. That's guaranteed on both sides. You can't throw. So given that point of view, you can't go back to 1996. The second one is, if they fight too much, then you have another scenario, which is even worse, and that's 111, a military caretaker government. Now, why that is worse? Well, the politicians suffered, no doubt. The 2 key leaders were arrested, etc. But more importantly, the business people suffered. Some of the key business people had to stay in Australia or Canada, roam around for 2 years. Pinak could know them, in fact, personally. So why would these business people, who actually give money to both the parties, why would they, want another kind of military caretaker government? Because there's no guarantee that the same issues would not come, and same issues of corruption and other. So given that 2 scenario, I think this time we are in a better position for a soft landing. Yes, it's only 2 months there, but I think it's a political culture. Bengal is very famous. Way back, Akbar's, one of the ministers, Abul Fazl, wrote, Bengal is a Balga Khana, house of turbulence. Stay away from Bengal, I don't think it has changed much, whether it is Mamata or, Khaleda, we are in the same ball in some way. So I think there will be a soft landing, but probably a kind of a Bollywood, photo finish, at the end this time, because the alternative is really worse. Whether you go alone, if AL goes alone, that would be, the violence that will continue, that will be tough. And if the military regime comes, I have a feeling that they will not be sober. I will end just by quoting Hegel. Well, Hegel once remarked that all great world historic facts and personages appear, so to speak, twice. Okay? But Marx pointed out that Hegel forgot to add, and I quote, the first time as tragedy, the second time as farce, unquote. There is no reason to believe that the politicians of today, given their experience in recent times, would be willing to end up as tragi-farcical players. And there lies the hope. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to thank Professor Imtiaz. This is vintage Imtiaz. I knew at some point we would have, Hegel, Marx, and theoretical underpinning, which, by the way, is very valuable. I think, again, it provides some very interesting points for discussion. I apologize for nudging speakers. I have a sense I may have to do it again. And I also want to thank all our principal speakers, because most of them have sent in their papers without exception. And I can see that we have very rich content, and it is a challenge to compress it into about 15 to 18 minutes, but Imtiaz has set a certain benchmark. I'll request the other speakers, Ambassador Veena Sikri, again, all of you know her, her CV is with you. I will not belabor the introduction, but request Veena to make her remarks, again, a former High Commissioner to Bangladesh, and stick within the time limit so that we have more time for the QA and still manage a cup of coffee. I think we can pull it off. Veena, all yours.
Well, I certainly agree with Imtiaz on one point, on his definition of the hyper-democracy in Bengal. But I'd like to refine his definition, where he said that 10 Bengalis means 20 political views. Actually, in India, we say 2 Bengalis means 3 political parties. So if we have so many Bengalis in this room, we may have a plethora of political parties to deal with. But anyway, I think that the focus of today's discussions are certainly very interesting, and I think we have to deal with the question of democracy in Bangladesh in a very serious, almost an apolitical manner, because the tragedy of democracy in Bangladesh is that despite the people being very committed and very concerned about having democracy, democratic institutions have not at all been allowed to put down deep roots in Bangladesh. And I think that this is the crisis of the problem, and anybody who's seriously interested in the welfare and in the and accepts the geostrategic and other economic regional importance of Bangladesh, and I certainly would like to underline the importance of Bangladesh, would and should work for strengthening the democratic institutions of Bangladesh. Democracy is said to have returned to Bangladesh in 1991. Before 1991, there were strong experiments. There were elections even in the East Pakistan time. There was a strong democratic constitution that Bangladesh had. And I'd like to focus on this point, that the strength of Bangladesh's democracy is really condensed into its 1972 constitution. And its 1972 constitution, which Sheikh Mujib, as father of the nation, gave to the country, is something that really, if it were followed, and if it had been followed all the years since Bangladesh's independence, would certainly have stood Bangladesh in good stead. The question of wanting a democratic, stable, and socialist Bangladesh, or economically prosperous Bangladesh, was enshrined in that. The separation of religion from politics. Sheikh Mujib banned religion-based political parties. I mean, he was perhaps one of the first political leaders anywhere in the world to have done that. And this was so important, and it has proved to be so prescient that he was able to foresee the problem of having religion-based political parties, and to see that with the coming back of Jamaat, what has happened in Bangladesh, it is important to really recall that. But then, of course, with the assassination of Sheikh Mujib, and perhaps even before that with the formation of the Baksal government, the elements of democracy weakened considerably. But since 1991, Bangladesh has had 4 democratic elections, 91, 96, 2001, 2008. And the fact that in each of these elections, the non-incumbent party has come to power is also a sign of a robust government, of robust democracy. But here I'd like to take on this issue that has been mentioned by both the previous speakers about the CTG government, about the caretaker government, that it came into being in 1996. Yes, it came into being through the efforts of the Awami League. Yes, that is true. And it came into being because of perceived difficulties or electoral irregularities. That is also true. But I think that it is wrong to blame the Awami League for ending the CTG. I think we forget that factors ended the CDG. First of all, it was during the BNP government between 2001 and 2006 that the unraveling of the CTG began, because it was the BNP government that amended the rules, amended the retirement age for Supreme Court judges so as to ensure that a judge favorable to them would become the CTG chief. So this was the political manipulation of the CTG system that was the beginning of the end. And I think if this had not happened, there would have been no reason at all for the CTG government to unravel like that. So I think this is some factor which nobody even mentions now, but actually it was the unraveling. And it became such an embarrassment that the judge, who was then in line after the rules were changed to become the CTG chief, declined, because it was so politically sensitive, so he declined. And then, as a result of that, Khaleda Zia made President Yajuddin the CTG chief, without even going through the entire constitutionally mandated points of selection of the CTG chief. She immediately appointed President Yajuddin, and his acts of omission and commission as President cum CTG chief is what led directly to the military-backed caretaker government in 2007 and 2008. So I think it's completely wrong to blame this unraveling of the CTG on the Awami League. The second point about the CTG is that subsequently the Supreme Court of Bangladesh declared it unconstitutional. That point too is never mentioned by anybody. And it declared it unconstitutional for the simple reason that in a parliamentary democracy, an unelected person cannot be head of a government. That's a simple, principle of a parliamentary democracy, that the head of the government has to be an elected person. And the CTG, even though he's there for whether it may be 90 days or as it happened in the 2007, 2008, 2 years. So it was as a direct result of the Supreme Court judgment that the CTG system was scrapped, and you had the practice brought in which is there in the present constitution and after the amendment of a normal parliamentary democracy. So I think that the whole system of blaming Awami League for it, number one, and number two, the entire business of trying to come on the streets to overturn this, the decision of the Awami League government, to overturn the constitutional amendment. So actually, this extreme violence that is taking place today, hartals, hartals, you're thinking it's very civilized and, people are not going to school and not going to office, but, this practice, you see it every day in the Bangladesh newspaper, so-and-so's tendon has been cut. It's like 4 words, tendon has been cut, but can you imagine for the person to whom it's happened what it means for his entire life? And this is like a daily practice, so it's building up a scenario of sheer horror in Bangladesh. And to think that anybody can support the BNP and Jamaat in this action, whether it is the US or anybody else, I think it is completely lawless. And to say that it's being done for restoring a CTG government, a CTG government practice, which is now no longer in the constitution. So are you trying to amend the constitution by coming out on the streets? So I think this is the kind of weakness of the democratic institutions of Bangladesh that need to be looked in very seriously, rather than, attributing motives and seeing what is there. And it is this weakness that has led to a weak executive, a weak legislature, a weak judiciary. And the judiciary is supposed to be independent of the government, but actually that practice of independent judiciary has not really been allowed to function, especially among the lower judiciary. There's still executive control. The bureaucracy is so politicized that, after a certain time, bureaucrats don't do anything because, hey, the next government will come and we'll be blamed for it. So, it is this weakness that is there. Civil society is very active in Bangladesh. I think one has to congratulate civil society, but even there, whether it is the academia or the lawyers, they are partisan. You have to first know, is so-and-so person pro-BNP or pro-AL? Is so-and-so person? And when you say something in Bangladesh, when you're talking there, you can see the other person. He's first thinking, what is being said? Is it pro-BNP? Is it pro-AL? The issue doesn't matter at all. What you're saying doesn't matter at all, but it matters whether you're, which box you fall into. So, these are some of the problems that I think that if all of us can, look at this and see how to strengthen the political institutions, that would really amend the present tendency of a complete regression to feudalism. Winner takes all is nothing but a feudal society. And so you have elections which are seen as the be-all and end-all. The only thing important in democracy is elections, but elections are a necessary but by no means a sufficient condition for democracy. And elections have now become money power and money power, muscle power, sheer brute force. There are two political parties. Yes, that is there in many countries. All over the world you have a situation where there are primary two political parties. But I certainly do not support this talk of a -2 kind of formula. You know, do away with the two ladies. I think it's most anti-feminist, because if there were two men leading these political parties, nobody would ever talk about removing two men, and you would say that's normal. So I think this business of talking about -2 is so anti-feminine that it should be rejected straight away and out of hand. But I think the real and important factor that you see, the biggest strength of Bangladesh really has been the people of Bangladesh. I don't think they're hyper-democratic. I think they love their democracy and they love their Bengali identity. It is true that that over time, and if you see the history of Bengal, beginning with the end of the 19th century, you've had this effort to bring in Wahhabism, to bring in a strong religious identity for Bengal, which was never there before that. And every time it has been tried, it has really failed. And I think the last time it failed was in the 2008 elections, when you had in the Awami League manifesto a very strong plea for you know, the end of religious fundamentalism, end of terrorism, social and economic development, friendship with neighbors, war crimes trial. And I think all this put together brought Sheikh Hasina the 3/4 majority that they had. But having said that, the religious forces in Bangladesh have by no means quiet. I think they are very dominant. They do receive a lot of external support, as we have, as many some speakers have mentioned, and it is dangerous because they have built up huge economic identities. And I think Professor Abul Barkat will be telling us about that. And because these economic identities and economic strengths that the religious groups have built up is something that is going to outlast a banning of the Jamaat or a prevention of Jamaat from being in political power. And I think that this is something that is very dangerous. But there is also the tendency, and I've seen it when I was there in Bangladesh, to define Jamaat as a moderate Islamic party, and Pinak has spoken about this. This is extremely, it's almost an oxymoron. But I think that how do you define a democratic party? You believe in democratic principles, you believe in, following a secular constitution, you believe in one man, one vote, you believe in an absence of violence. I think so these are some of the issues that should be there when we're looking at the activities of the Jamaat, and we should really be supporting the efforts to go back to the secular democratic ideals with which Bangladesh was formed. The army and the civil military relations in Bangladesh are another very important aspect. But I think with the end of the 2-year military-backed caretaker government, you have seen a situation where it is very unlikely that the army would really try again to take back political power. The army is willing to retain its own special position in Bangladesh, which goes without saying. The army also has strong economic interests, which of course they will retain. But I think the army as a political power is unlikely. So if we can see that army will not have political power, and if you can ensure that the religious-based political parties don't want to change the life pattern, don't want to change the will of the people of Bangladesh for a pluralistic society, then you can hope to have democracy there. And India is certainly very seriously concerned to see what the religious-based parties are doing to the minorities. I mean, whether it was against Ramu, the Buddhists, and the Buddhist heritage in Ramu earlier this year it was, or whether it was in the last 2 weeks against in Pabna and Lalmunir Ghat. And Satkira also, and these are, it's such a pattern that something comes on the internet, something that is said to be against the Prophet Muhammad, and so there are huge, there's violence, there's destruction of property, destruction of the individuals. Against the CHT people, there's land grabbing. So I think these kind of To end this, you need a strong judiciary, you need a strong civil society, you need a courts which will take suo motu notice of this and arrest those people who have started this, you know. Now you do have an information commission system, maybe this will come up before the information commission, and the information commissioners can ask the government to give information. So I think it is these factors that we have to bring to the end of, have to be brought into play to end the present impasse in Bangladesh. The influence of donor countries. I think this is completely, I would say almost unnatural for a large country like Bangladesh, a large prosperous country like Bangladesh. But again, anything that goes wrong, you go and ask somebody outside. Why don't you come and tell so-and-so? Why don't you come and tell so-and-so? So, oh, yes, please. So I think this again is the donor countries are interested in the development of Bangladesh. They accept that Bangladesh is geopolitically a very strategic country. They want Bangladesh to be prosperous, and they accept that the people of Bangladesh are a force for moderation and for pluralistic society. But then why not leave it at that? Why not bring about the economic development that will end the poverty that was leading to all this, youngsters, young children going and joining Jamaat and joining demonstrations and participating in the political mayhem of Bangladesh. I think this is where, there used to be a Tuesday club when I was there, I think it was called, where the donor countries met and decided on what was good for Bangladesh for the next 1 week. The next Tuesday they had a different opinion very often. But I think that if these efforts were focused very much on the interests of Bangladesh as a very viable economy, that would really end all this violence and hartals that we are seeing in Bangladesh. And I think that I only have a very few minutes left. So in these few minutes, I would like to say that we still are concerned. I think that Sheikh Hasina, when she came to power in 2008, she had a very robust manifesto which she has sought to implement. I think that the war crime trials, I would slightly disagree with Imtiaz on this. I think the war crime trials are a tremendously important event to bring closure to history in Bangladesh. And I think it's remarkable that it is the younger generation that wants this closure. I mean, you would imagine that in a country like Bangladesh, where many of the people who were out in Shahbag Square were not even born when the liberation war took place, they are out there saying that we want closure to history. We don't believe that anybody who was against the birth of Bangladesh can actually not be tried for his actions against. So I think this is a very legitimate demand. And I think that, you should see the latest war crime verdict against Chaudhry Moinuddin, the one who is in UK. It's against a person, he's been sentenced to death. It's a person who's been living all these 40 years, where? In the UK. And he's been elevated and to become a member of the UK Muslim Council. And the other person who's got it, he's in USA. But what I was interested was that in the case of Chaudhry Moinuddin, when he got this, there was such an outpouring in the British press, saying, what are you doing with him still living here? He's responsible, and the British, as you know, have been opposing the war crimes trial, quietly through the Guardian, through the Economist and stuff like that. The media, the popular media came out in a huge way against Chaudhry Moinuddin. And this is remarkable. Why should he be there in the UK? And they even said, we don't want the British government to spend millions of pounds to fight against his extradition because we don't want a murderer amidst us. So I think that, this feeling of the people everywhere for a genuine democracy is something that should be respected and something that should be really, used to bring this peace. Now, okay, so now I think it is time for me to end. I think that we have to, my last sentence is that only one point I'd like to, say what Imtiaz said. Imtiaz said the loss of those 5 elections meant that the people don't want the CTG. The people are against the AL because of CTG. I think the loss of the elections for the AL were really because of acts of omission and commission by the AL themselves in governance. But in the last poll published in the Daily Star 3 days ago, on governance, the majority is in favor of AL. On the CTG, maybe not. On war crime, maybe not. So let us all decide to work for an economically prosperous, a stable, and secular and democratic Bangladesh. If we do that, this is in India's best interest, this is in the interest of the people of Bangladesh, and this will bring success and a win-win situation to all. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Sikri. I apologize to Veena again for pushing her. But let me also admit that, moderating this discussion, I am biased in a gender visible manner. All the ladies are getting more than 2 to 3 minutes than what the gents have had till now. And I'm going to request Sri Radha, a colleague of mine from the IDSA, currently Professor Sri Radha Datta at the Maulana Azad Institute in Calcutta for Asian Studies. And she will address us on the issue of, does the world have a stake in democracy in Bangladesh? The short answer is an emphatic yes, but I'm sure Professor Datta will tell us why. Sri Radha, you are on the very strict right watch.
I think we've just given the concept note that we had in front of us, almost everything that's been said here. I thought I'll just begin by adding to the point that Ambassador Sikri said about weak legislatures and weak executive and weak judiciary. I'd also like to mention here that Bangladesh obviously also has weak memory. Why do I say that? Yes, because let me just take you back to 2008 December. Over 76, 78 voters turnout, 2/3 majority for a single political party. That meant what? That obviously meant that Bangladesh voted for secularity, voted for the secular fabric to be brought back in place. Today, something that was just referred to just now, 3 days ago, the largest English national daily in Bangladesh did a poll, which has also been corroborated by a poll by Prathamalo, which is their largest national daily really, which says that Awami League only gets 28% of the voters' support today, over 58 for BNP. I'm absolutely shocked. Has Bangladesh forgotten 2001 to 2006? It's just been diluted. I know there is this always anti-incumbency factor which works in Bangladesh, but just let's look at the indicators right now. Yes, fuel price has hit the sky. Yes, food prices hit the sky in Bangladesh. That's happened everywhere. Why blame Awami League for it? Look at the other sectors. They've done wonders in South Asia, the education sector, the service sector. They've actually got energy back in place. We've seen how the kind of load shedding, Dhaka itself, forget the outside smaller areas suffered. Certain things are back in place, certainly. Yes, she's not been able to deal with unemployment. The largest economy in the world hasn't been able to deal with unemployment. Why blame Bangladesh for that? So I'm completely astonished by this poll, and I'm saying both two national papers have corroborated the same facts and figures. So obviously, it's not made and it's not fiction. That certainly tells me that Bangladesh certainly has very weak memory. Let me go back again a little bit. I think there's been long references to 2006. Again, we've seen how just recently the Shahbag experience. It was something that all of us really watched very closely. Certainly the outpouring was completely instantaneous. Of course, it's a fact that Awami League jumped the gun, tried to own it. And then, of course, you had all the religious and the other political parties trying to own it. And that's where the trouble began. My problem with Bangladesh here right now is thanks to that problem, thanks to this wanting to own every particular movement that emanates from the grassroots, you've got the Islamic fundamental violent agenda back on the table, which I think, and I must say this for Awami League, and I know completely, and anybody who's ever read any of my writings will say, I think, and Kumar Bhaskar would certainly agree with this, that I was the first constantly saying that let's look at the problems within Awami League. Look at the way it's completely run on authoritarian lines. In fact, Bangladesh is a complete story of contradictions. 1991, yes, elections. There has been elections after every 5 years. But has the government ever, irrespective of who's in power, ever been run on democratic lines? Nothing. There's absolutely nothing democratic about the way the politicals run the place. But quite ironically, who actually tried to institutionalize, stabilize these democratic institutions, it was the army. I mean, is this a joke somewhere? The army was actually the one who's been able to do that. And again, Bangladeshis will never have an army in place to govern them after given their last 15 years of experience. That obviously works in the favor of the political parties. Just because Bangladesh do not want the army in place, and they were, I mean, quite rightfully shooed out in 2007, and 2008 you had the elections. But to actually think that how political parties have not been able to consolidate either within their own party or any of the institutions within the government, within the country, which I think is obviously a cause for concern. Our immediate concern is, as I said, and there's enough reference to Jamaat, even if Jamaat becomes a party which is not going to be able to fight the elections, which again political party is trying very hard, the Awami League is trying for it. But again, what is the perception of Bangladesh today? Awami League certainly is not popular. The Yunus factor hasn't worked in its favor. The corruption issues had hit skyrocket. And she, if you remember, Awami League came on that plank of anti-corruption. She came on plank of security also. She's really cleaned up, addressed the security issues. And I think that's something every neighbor appreciates. India certainly does. But having said that, the way the agenda is back on the table, can we say that this is going to be in place again? And I think the fear here is, again, and I completely agree with Imtiaz that there is going to be a soft landing. Somebody's going to blink, and I know Awami League is going to blink. Yes, you did away with CTG, and it's the rightful position that it's not there. It's been scrapped, so how are you referring to it? But I think the problem is, why was it scrapped in the first place? Just because you got that 3/4 majority as a coalition government, did you think that you were in that position to actually do away with a caretaker system which has worked for you? I know the caretaker government does not work for anybody else. It doesn't in today's day and age. But Bangladesh as a state has not reached that level of maturity as yet. That's a pity, but it hasn't. But let's face the facts. And that actually, I think, from that point, the downward spiral of Awami League's popularity really came. And it hasn't. She hasn't helped matters. Some of her statements are extremely uninformed, irresponsible. This is vis-a-vis the minorities also. We've seen the kind of statements she's done in Chittagong Hill tribes. It wasn't something that actually goes for a political party which is supposed to be secular, which is in fact is, and I completely agree that as long as Sheikh Hasina is there, we shall try and keep the secular fabric in place. Without Sheikh Hasina, what Awami League will mean is a completely different monster as far as I can read it. But as long as Sheikh Hasina is there, that semblance of security, a semblance of secularism is going to be in Bangladesh. And I think for all of us sitting here, I think that's something that all of us want to support. This is irrespective of the fact, the kind of irresponsible moves that this government has done. It's a fact that Bangladesh, and I don't know some of you who read the abstract here. When I was writing the paragraph, I in fact went back to a very earlier publication of mine, and I wrote, and I saw that those paragraphs which are written right now in 2013 November is almost similar to what I'd written in 1998. Nothing really has changed. Nothing really has changed in Bangladesh. But today, so where do we stand? Yes, the two political parties, the main two political parties do not talk to each other. We've seen, all of us read the transcripts of those the red phone, and how BNP constantly talked about the fact that they can't do anything about meeting the Prime Minister because of, it was Hartal and she has alliances to think of. So that obviously very clearly tells you that Jamaat is there in the reckoning. It can be in any name. It doesn't matter what you call Jamaat. You make it illegal, they'll come back. You ban it, they'll come back with a different name. And that's something that we've seen. What is being played out in the road is apparently really, really clear. I don't think there is much that can be done except for the fact that we'll have to ensure, somebody has to ensure, again, there's been a point about, I think the Tuesday Coffee Club has been referred to. One particular country who actually can reach out to both is China, and we know China does not want to reach out to either of them. They're of course doing things as they can, as they do very quietly and completely away from the main public glare. But at the same time, I think the choice is really clear here, that it is the secular fabric that we want to continue in Bangladesh. We certainly, nobody here wants any of what we've seen in the last 6 months to come up to the forefront. And I don't think any of us have forgotten what 2001 and 2006 was all about. And this is not only about bilateral problems that India had with BNP. I'm also referring to the problems that the BNP coalition meant for the Bangladesh themselves. And I'm really astonished to see that Bangladesh themselves have forgotten that. And today they're actually saying that, of course, and it's a fact that they had also forgotten a lot of things. So it actually took 40 years to start war crime trials. I mean, that also goes to tell you about their memory and obviously about their priorities. So the fact that, again, and I think the point well made by Imtiaz is that, again, while it was absolutely the most, wondrous thing that was happening to Bangladesh, it has also been perceived as being extremely biased. And I'm not sure how anybody can actually encourage both the Begums in Bangladesh to actually ensure that there is a certain amount of balance in what they do. They take completely extreme positions, and I may sound anti-feminist here, but essentially one wants to outdo the other in terms of being irrational here. I mean, this is the story of Bangladesh for the last 1991. And I think the polarization is really deep and sharp again. And what it means for India is immediate, that I think there's going to be a rollback of all that we've seen good things happening from 2010 onwards. And there's absolutely no way to ignore the fact that it's worked wonders not only in addressing the terror issues within Bangladesh, the Islamic militancy issues within Bangladesh, what it has also meant for India at large and also for the regional stability in terms of ensuring that Bangladesh is not a source of Islamic militancy, which for 4 years, we've seen how it actually changed the entire regional scenario. That's, I think, something we are all looking towards. It's a fact that that debate between political stability and democracy and the army is going to go on. And again, I am extremely optimistic. Every time I write, I always have the army because I really think the army is the wild card in Bangladesh. While I certainly believe that the Bangladeshis will not support the armies to actually take on the rules of the government or stay in there, but the fact that both the political parties have been able to maintain an extremely good relation tells you also the story of the army. The army has not as yet cut its umbilical cord with politics in Bangladesh. And I think we need to remember that. And even if they, and we saw that, how they did so in 2006 to 2007. How they actually run the place through the facade. So I wouldn't be surprised if they continue to do the same. And I don't think that's good for Bangladesh, that's not good for regional stability, that certainly is not good for India. While on the contrary, as I said, Bangladesh is a story of contradictions. Though that short period of 2 years, there were actually a lot of things delivered on the table which had been promised by political leaders, which hadn't been, but the army was actually able to deliver that. Simply because they were able to maintain certain, they didn't have this competition between two main Begums. I think that was one thing that they didn't have to do. They didn't have to play to the gallery, which the two Begums are constantly doing. Right now, we know that Awami League's popularity is really dipping. She hasn't done wonders. Her public statements are irresponsible, as I said. But at the same time, I think all of us should remember that BNP coalition, and I know this is going to be again a coalition with the religious political parties, does not pose anything positive for Bangladesh, for India, for region outside and the western parts. The donor group is extremely active there. But again, there's limits to how much you can actually influence domestic politics. But I think one needs to really look at that and see that whether right now there can be a consensus dialogue where you can actually have elections. Because again, given the past of 1996 and previously we've seen that elections without one political major party not being represented is going to be farcical. Even, and I know there was lots of talk here as to how Awami was also, and let's not forget that Jamaat, of course, is the queen maker in Bangladesh, that they've also constantly reached out to Islamic political parties. We've seen that they actually had to go back on some of the agreements that Sheikh Hasina herself had. But this is really to counter the BNP coalition. But the BNP coalition is going to have religious political parties on its day. And we know what religious political parties coming to Bangladesh means for not only Bangladesh, but for India and everybody else. So the only hope here is that somehow, if you can't have a dialogue, if you can't have elections, you can roll back this violent Islamic agenda which is back on the table. That's the only way to ensure that the two leaders actually sit across the table. They do it over the red phone, they do it over anything, but actually ensure the elections, and elections are going to be held in January for sure, that there is representation of all major political parties. That's the way ahead. There is really no huge promise that the minute elections are held, things are going to be stable. The two political parties have been far too responsible for far too long. They're not going to change overnight. I don't think there is any such hope about that. But certainly, the way Bangladesh has progressed economically, it has certainly made its place in the South Asia region. Those divisions shouldn't be unraveled, I think, with the doings of the two Begums. One can only hope, and I'm sure there is lots of attempts on different vested interests to ensure that elections are held which has representations of all the political parties. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sriradha, I think, for a very comprehensive overview. Now, I want to thank the other speakers also, I think, for setting the stage, as it were, that between the three of them, they have outlined what could be the evolving political scenario in Bangladesh itself, the view from India, and what are the regional and larger global implications. If I could just take a minute to extend this further and say that in the beginning when I said that does the world have a stake in the consolidation of democracy in Bangladesh, and I took the liberty of suggesting that the answer is an emphatic yes. The reason is that in many ways Bangladesh, like many other countries who are going through a similar grapple, is a test case, definitely in the regional context. And while it is obvious that the greatest importance and significance is for the domestic context, which is the people of Bangladesh, I think the fidelity to the democratic principle and the degree to which you can co-opt and bring in what you might call as the Islamist or the Islamic, and as I said, I want to be a little careful with how we phrase this, because this is going on in different parts of the world. It has different manifestations, and we have some extreme views, one which seems to suggest that there is an incompatibility, and the other which says that this is not true at all, and that it is possible to have the equivalent of a country-specific, society-specific kind of variant. And I think it's in that sense, when Imtiaz in the beginning spoke about this distinctive Bangla identity and the cultural element, I think the reason why the global community has a stake is that whether we talk about Nairobi, we talk about Mumbai, we talk about events in AFPAC and elsewhere, we know what we don't want and what is the way in which one can perhaps create an ecosystem that would lead to a more desirable result. And here, to bring in these very, very, I would say, complex issues, this whole question of the ideology of Islam, which again Imtiaz briefly touched upon the Salafi, the Wahhabi, and the degree of tolerance, the identity of the other. How do you interpret the jihad? Is it only the call to the collective to take up arms, or do we go back to the ontological original root of the ijtihad, the personal dimension, and how do you bring this into both the polity and the political discourse? So that, I thought, would give us some sense of the context. I'll recognize those whom I could not in the earlier part. Ambassador Tripathi will go first, and I've got the others. I'll bring them in slowly.
Well, I think we had a very interesting beginning of this conference. In the morning, I think we heard 3 Indians and 1 Bangladeshi, and then 3 Bengalis and 1 non-Bengali. That's very important. But it's very clear, as a Bengali myself, I think Bengalis in general, and Bangladeshis in particular, have grappled with 2 sets of identities. One is a linguistic cultural identity, and the other is, of course, the religious identity. And at some point in time or the other, either of these 2 identities takes the dominant stage. And it is largely determined how the protagonists have played their cards prior to that. Unfortunately, as was brought out by the speakers, neither the BNP or the army are essentially democratic in structure. They are very authoritarian. In fact, when I used to be Deputy High Commissioner many years ago, my American counterpart told me that this is really a war between the widow and the orphan. And they both are able to generate a tremendous amount of sympathy in sections of the society. And their position is unassailable within their own parties. We in India, we have some experience of this, how important a family can become in a political context. Now, it's a tragedy for Bangladesh. I have nothing against women. I'm sure that many women leaders were superb.
We believe you, Amitabh.
But the fact of the matter is that, to be very honest, these two ladies have not been fair to Bangladesh. We have listened about economic progress in Bangladesh, the social parameters where Bangladesh has shown great promise. So this is not a basket case anymore like it used to be in the 1970s. Unfortunately, the political maturity of Bangladesh has not kept pace. Now we have a totally different generation. Right? The Mukti Jodha generation is almost over. Of course, the Shahbaz events show that even among the young generation, there is still that spirit of Mukti Jodha is not completely dead. It is very much there. But again, when the government tries to sort of hijack that process, then there is again a tremendous backlash. And we see the fundamentalists coming back to this. Now, as far as India is concerned, and I'm sure we are having this meeting in Delhi, the Indian concern is very serious. Now, we were the midwives in the creation of Bangladesh. What happens to Bangladesh is of great concern to us. Now, it is very clear that the BNP Jamaat group, if they come to power, are not going to be sympathetic. And many of the speakers are very, very clear that there is a tremendous amount of disquiet and concern that if we see a return of these BNP Jamaat combined to power in Dhaka for following the January 2014 elections, things are going to be very difficult for us. So this is what we need to address very carefully. Thank you. Yes, sir.
My name is Raj Bhandari. I am had been an international civil servant and a civil servant in India. So I have looked Bangladesh from both the angles. I had been to Bangladesh before the birth of Bangladesh, way back in 1950. I have been to Bangladesh on the birth of Bangladesh. I have spent 1 month or 2 months in Bangladesh. I was managing director of Jute Corporation, and I had the responsibility of collecting all the jute which was lying on the border, which cannot come to Narayanganj, back, brought in Calcutta, packed. So I have seen Bangladesh on a broad. I'll give you a historical perspective of Bangladesh. Before I say, I am not a Bengali by birth, but I am Bengali by bash. And there is a saying in Bengal that what Bengal does today, the rest of world will do tomorrow, whether it is Gerao or Hartal or Addabaji. Having said this, I have seen Bangladesh. Bangladesh has the best civil service. I remember my colleagues Sanaul Haq and Jaman, Islam al Jaman. There was no lack of civil service in Bangladesh. The problem in Bangladesh, as I see from prospects of democratic consolidation, has been fourfold. Number one, the judiciary has not acted as a watchdog as it should have been. It has been manipulated. Number two, money played a greater part in politics in Bangladesh. It is playing politics everywhere. So Bangladesh is no exception, but a greater part. And this has facilitated by what we call dual citizenship in Bangladesh. In Bangladesh, there is a dual citizenship. You can be a Bangladeshi, you can be a US citizen, you can be a UK citizen. And people who are aligning one party, they easily move to the outside Bangladesh once the going was not good. That is another reason which is causing a lot of problem. To presume that Bangladesh has not been affected by growth of technology would be wrong. Bangladesh is as advanced, if not more advanced than India. So I think the public opinion in Bangladesh is going to be affected by the new instruments of communication, etc. And this will determine not on the outside, but inside, when the people will go to booth to vote, to whom he will vote. I mean, we have seen here in India, we have seen in other countries, people talk before entering the booth of one party. When they enter, they vote for another party. So the communication technology impact has to be assessed, whether the democratic consolidation will take place or not. The last point that I wish to make is that economy will play a major part. I have been associated, as I said, in 71, I was managing director of Jute Corporation, but from 77 onwards, I was a principal advisor in WTO International Trade Center, and I have visited Bangladesh many times. We have seen the economy is picking up, and people are more concerned with bread and butter than what is called on the streets. And the whole thing has changed. Jute used to be the principal item of export in Bangladesh when Bangladesh took place. Later on, it is the textile, it is ready-made garments, it is vegetable. Jute doesn't figure in the first 5 items of Bangladesh. So economy is going to play critical role in consolidation of democracy. These are the points I wish to make. Thank you.
Deliberate on this. I'll now recognize Dr. Smriti Patnaik from the IDSA. She's a well-known scholar on Bangladesh in India. And we were also colleagues in the IDSA, so she'll stick to time, I know for sure. Smriti, you have all of 5 minutes.
I think just 2 points I will make, because I know I have been so used to Commodore Bhaskar's chairmanship, and I always used to say that don't give me the yellow slip. I remember in IDSA, I said, that makes me nervous, and as it is, I speak fast. I'll speak much faster if I see the yellow slip. Now, 2 points which I want to make is that the reasoning and arguments, for the BNP to get back to the Jamaat publicly, I think was provided by the Awami League, especially after the Shahbag, because BNP to some degree was trying to, think whether it should publicly own its alliance with Jamaat for some time. But then again, it got the opportunity, and in the first opportunity, it took into account and thought that probably it is much more beneficial, because it politicized the war crime trials, which was continuing for some time. And I think the Awami League also gave opportunity to BNP to provide with those logics to disown the war crime trial, because BNP till now is very supportive of the war crime per se, but definitely the process which is adopted by the current government, lot of loopholes. It's not just the BNP. Many of us would not agree with the manner in which the war crime trial is being conducted in Bangladesh, because I think perceptions are much more important in this context compared to the actual process of trial. Second issue is that I think 2 points regarding Imtiaz's presentation. Those are basically, he says that BNP fears that Jamaat will go for elections and BNP will get pressurized. I really do not agree, because Jamaat's leadership, all of them are sentenced to death. Only one of them, which is again gone for appeal, Abdul Qadir Molla's verdict. But I think Jamaat is also in a very, very bad situation. So even if the Jamaat goes for the election, yes, it will provide to some extent sanctity, but I'm not very sure what sanctity Jamaat's participation will get to the election process if the main opposition party, which is, as the opinion poll shows, that perhaps may come back to power. If that doesn't participate, I think Jamaat participation is not actually so important. So I really do not agree with that. The BNP actually fears that Jamaat participation will legitimize the poll, if that is what Imtiaz meant. I really do not know. Second issue is that, you very clearly spoke about the Jamaat Islami and Hifazat. You said both of them are Salafist, both of them are Wahhabi. But I have a, difference here, because Jamaat is much more, you spoke of the Maududi factor also, as far as the Jamaat and Hifazat is concerned. But I think which is very, very important is also the ulema factor. Hifazat is much more ulema-based party, and Jamaat is, this is a basic contradiction which exists everywhere between the Islamic political parties. Whether any political party believing in Maududi ideology can actually bring in Islamic revolution. Now, this is something which is always challenged by the ulema political party. It's a very different issue that in Bangladesh, the ulema political parties are actually not very strong. They have aligned with the Jamaat because otherwise they can't come to power. And which surprises me that is that one is Maududi-based, Maududi philosophy-based, which is questioned by the ulema political parties, that they actually cannot bring the Islamic revolution. Of course, one can speak of various, militant groups who again believe, which is a distinction between the two Islamic political parties and militant group is, that the militant groups have a much more top-down approach, and that is where I think everybody is much more apprehensive about what will happen in Bangladesh. as far as the Islamic political parties are concerned in Bangladesh, they are much more believe in bottom-up approach. Many may not have a problem with that. I think especially the JMJB and JMB provided with a kind of fear that perhaps the top-down approach, which many of the people thought that may not happen in Bangladesh with all the bomb blasts and suicide bombing, which any one of us is very unbelievable that it could have happened in Bangladesh. You know, it's very difficult to believe that Bengalis can go for suicide bombing, because I always used to tell the Bengalis that, you know, the Bengalis, the eastern part of India, the Bengalis, ODIs are very scared people, you know, in that terms, you know, because when one speaks of the culture of this thing. So I feel that, you know, one has to take into that account the kind of transformation which has taken place in Bangladesh politics in terms of much more militant Islam has come into play, which is not the case. And that is where I think many of the Indians have problem, though the Bangladeshis always keep on saying that, you know, we are Bengalis, you know, we are culturally actually not Islamist as we look at Pakistan. But I think this is what probably the Bangladeshis don't take into account when the Indian says that why they are very apprehensive about the happenings in Bangladesh. Thank you, sir.
You know, Chand Joshi, a late journalist, some of you may know him, many years ago had this very interesting tongue-in-cheek piece about the courage of the Bengali, and he comes from a family that, you know, was personally involved, but that's a detour. I won't get into that. Sanjay, quickly.
All of the eastern communities are not scared of violence. I mean, Assam or other northeastern groups certainly are not. So there's been, you know, that issue is different. But I think I'd like some reflection on how both our colleagues in Bangladesh and people at this table think the prospect of a return to power of the BNP and the Jamaat in whatever form will impact the eastern part of our country. I'm not just talking in terms of just militancy or assistance to militant groups, but in other ways, whether the theme of the conference of fundamentalism and the possible expansion of that space into both Bengal and Assam particularly. That's of concern, certainly in that region. The second thing is, I think that, you know, despite, I mean, I noted Sriradha's points on the two Begums and the HDI. I think despite the two Begums, you know, Bangladesh has done pretty well, you know. So I think that this is a very important point to understand, that people choose things that practically help them. They don't they're not necessarily bound by the governments that rule them. And Bangladesh is really a remarkable example of this. The third point is that I think we need to think really about moving forward continuously despite whoever comes to power on the people-to-people process, you know, celebrating diversity as well as commonality, you know, the simple things, whether it's sports or music, or the things that bind us are greater than the things that divide us, including water and rivers. The last point is, what can we learn from Bangladesh? I think this is often something that in India we do not even look at, and I think that's a huge arrogance. We do not look, perhaps, and we do not agree with the way even the former Bangladesh border force was, the mutiny was, mutineers have been tried and convicted. We may not agree with that. But how many of our own armed forces personnel who are involved in rape, murder, burning of villages, assault, disappearances have been brought to book publicly? We may not agree with what they've done or how they've done it. We have a lot to learn about what they've done. And I think this is very important for us to recognize and appreciate. Often we forget there are great things in Bangladesh we should value. The fact that they took on the fundamentalists head on and hanged, you know, the Bangabandhu and all those in one day. We tend to forget little bits of histories.
Thank you, Sanjay. I, want to apologize. I have 3 more names. I'm unable to take you on board for a very sort of inflexible logistic reason, meaning that tea, coffee is ready, and we need to sort of turn around so that lunch can then be ready. So if you permit me, I will, no, I'm saying I'll do that a little later. I don't know how I'll do it now, but I'll try and do it. And what I want to say is that a very minor sort of administrative announcement. Tea, coffee is organized outside. Please pick up your hot beverage and come back into the room so that we save a little time. And to the extent possible, I want to start the next session 5 minutes after 12. And there's a slight tweak in the program, which you'll have a revised program on your table very soon. In the next session, we'll have 3 speakers, Professor Abul Barkat, General Afsar Karim, and Professor Sadika Halim. That will be the order, and the new program will be on your table as we move out for tea. So, thank you, speakers. I'm sorry I nudged you. We'll try and get you a chance to respond, and we can also encourage some bilaterals over tea, and we come back here 5 minutes after 12. Thank you so much.